Although some heir hunts unravel quickly and are concentrated in one specific area, others remain unsolved for years and take in many different countries and a broad sweep of history. Tadeusz Gaweda was just such a case. He died in 1991 in this house in Forest Hill in South London, leaving an estate worth £37,000, but no will. His case had remained unsolved for many years when Hector Birchwood from heir hunting firm Celtic Research took it on. Hector remembers coming across his unusual-sounding name on the Treasury's weekly list of unclaimed estates.
When I immediately saw the name Gaweda, my assumption at that point was that it was Polish. Of course, that could mean Ukrainian Polish, that could mean Belarusian Polish. There are a number of Polish communities in Central Europe and in places like Italy or France. So really at that point, it really didn't tell me a lot.
Hector started his investigations by looking for Tadeusz's death certificate.
Well, the death certificate is usually of some help, but the information you get is only as good as the informant, so they may not know the deceased or they may not know as much as they think they know about the deceased.
In Tadeusz's case, although the date of death in 1991 was correct, there was obviously a mistake with the birth, which was also shown as being in 1991. According to the certificate, he was born in Poland. But was that a mistake as well?
As a matter of protocol, we always look for the birth in this country, and we couldn't find one.
Without a birth certificate or any reliable information, Hector had nothing to go on. He knew that trying to find this information from the public records in Poland might prove challenging. For the moment, he was stumped. Hector then had an inspired thought. He decided to cross-reference Tadeusz's death by going back to the death index record held in the General Register Office. Sure enough, the record revealed that Tadeusz had been born in 1929. From there, Hector found that he had arrived in England in 1946 with the Polish Resettlement Corps. When the Second World War ended, many Polish soldiers who had fought alongside the British against the Nazis chose not to return to what was now communist Poland. Instead, they came to live in the UK. When the soldiers first arrived, they were housed in temporary camps until they were able to start a new life in this country.
Many people who came here during World War II or just after World War II, from the Ukraine, from Poland, from many other places, they often had to reinvent themselves and establish themselves in this country. They often could not go back. So that often meant they got married and they had children here, possibly even if they had a wife back home. That does happen. So we were mindful of the possibility that he may have been previously married, but we did look for a marriage for him here. And that's where we came across a marriage. And that was really the first break in the case.
Hector discovered that Tadeusz married a Carmen Garrido in Willesden in London in 1957.
Anytime we do find a marriage, it does bring up some hope, at least a few glimmers of hope. There's a possibility that there might be children. There's a possibility that we may be able to find the spouse's family, who may be able to tell us something about the deceased family, maybe even give us names and addresses of his family. So there are always, glimmers of hope whenever we find a marriage, but we didn't really know exactly where that would lead.
With two unusual surnames like Gaweda and Garrido, it wasn't long before Hector came across birth records for some children, born in Ulster in Warwickshire. Tadeusz and Carmen had 3 children, a son Roberto and 2 daughters, all of whom would be heirs to their father's £37,000 estate.
Well, once we found the births, it really threw open the case. We could see that the deceased had biological children. They may have been adopted, they may have changed their names, but at least it offered an avenue by which we could crack this case and find some rightful heirs for this estate.
But then the trail ran cold. Hector couldn't find any further trace of Tadeusz's children in this country. If they had left England when they were very young, they could have been anywhere by now. But he took a guess that with a surname like Garrido, their mother may have taken them to Spain.
Well, having a bit of luck on your side is always really important in being able to crack a case. And that's really why I looked into Spain. It just seemed like it fitted better than other places. I wasn't sure about it, but it looked better than the other options.
Another piece of luck for Hector was that he speaks fluent Spanish, so he was ideally placed to conduct an investigation there.
One of the things that we did find just by trawling through the internet was that the family of Gaweda Garrido is only centred in one place in Spain, in Valencia. The case was cracked, as far as I was concerned. I just needed to find people and talk to them.
Hector found a recent record for Tadeusz's son, Roberto, online, along with some contact details, so he decided to make a first attempt to contact him.
¿Aló? ¿Me puedo comunicar con el señor Roberto Gaweda, por favor?
Still to come.
Initially, our contact with Roberto wasn't exactly very successful.
Hector's air hunt runs into a spot of bother.
My first impression was that it was a con.
And in the search for Douglas Greatrex's heirs, one beneficiary gets a lot more than she bargained for.
Might pay for a holiday, you never know.
Might get a bit further than Blackpool.
For every case that is solved, there are still thousands that remain a mystery. Currently, over 3,000 names drawn from across the country are on the Treasury's unsolved case list. With estates valued at anything from £5,000 to millions of pounds, the rightful heirs are out there somewhere. Today we've got two cases heir hunters have so far failed to solve. Could you be the missing link? Could you be in line for a payout? Mustafa Kamal died in Kingston upon Thames, Surrey, on the 8th of November 2005. Was he a friend or neighbour of yours? Could you even be related to him and entitled to his estate? Bertha Helen Hudson passed away on the 16th of October 1998 in Sleaford, Lincolnshire. If no relatives come forward, her money will go to the government. But should it be headed your way? If the names Mustafa Kamal or Bertha Helen Hudson mean anything to you, you could have a fortune coming your way. Heir hunter Hector Birchwood was searching for heirs to Tadeusz Gaweda's £37,000 estate. He gambled that Tadeusz's children had returned to Spain with their mother, Carmen, and his gamble paid off. He found a phone number for Tadeusz's son, Roberto, who was out when he called, so he left a message telling him that he could be a beneficiary of an estate.
¿Aló? ¿Me puedo comunicar con el señor Roberto Gaweda, por favor?
My
first impression was that it was a con. You know, one of those internet scams where they contact you and tell you that they've been lucky enough to inherit some money.
Patrimoniales a tu favor, ¿no? Una herencia, pues esa fue la primera impresión.
As Hector had guessed, Roberto's parents' marriage had broken down, and his mother had taken the children back to live with her parents in Spain.
Nosotros vivíamos en Madrid. Llamó en alguna ocasión por teléfono. Y mi madre...
He called the house one time when we were in Madrid, but my mother was always so scared that he would come and try and take us away.
Legalmente, porque mi madre lo que hizo...
Legally, she had been in the wrong. At that time, you needed the father's permission if children were going to leave the country without him.
Del padre, que en aquella época en Inglaterra, para poder salir del país, pues se requería de la firma del padre.
Tadeusz never made another attempt to contact his children, and Roberto's mother never spoke of him. So Roberto's only knowledge of his father were a few photos and the stories told to him by his grandfather.
Mi abuelo vino aquí a Inglaterra cuando nosotros éramos...
My grandfather came to England once with my grandmother when we were very little. He met my father, and it seems they had a lot in common.
Muy inteligente, muy trabajador.
He always said he was a very intelligent man and a very hard worker. So I can't help thinking that I'd have loved to have had the chance to talk to him.
Gustado, pues, poder hablar con mi padre y...
But after talking to Hector, Roberto decided to come over to England to find out what he could about the father he never knew.
Bueno, eso es la conclusión final de...
For me, this is the final conclusion of my father's life. The great thing is that now I have the chance to finish the story.
De poder cerrar la película, ¿no?
Being able to fill in the gaps of his life that I never knew will help me to understand him better.
Va a servir para ponerlo todo más en claro.
With the case solved, Hector arranged to meet Roberto to give him the information and paperwork provided by the Treasury. This included the immigration application that was written by the Home Office when Tadeusz arrived in Britain in 1946.
¿Qué tal, Héctor? ¿Cómo estamos? ¿Qué tal?
Gracias, sí.
Muy bien, siéntate.
This brief paragraph gave a fascinating insight into his early life during one of the darkest periods of European history.
Lo que puedo decir simplemente es que había nacido en Francia.
The document revealed that his father was actually born in France in 1929 and that the family only moved to eastern Poland in 1933.
Usted lo puede buscar, solo pone...
But any hopes of a peaceful family life were destroyed when in 1939 Hitler's army invaded Poland and Tadeusz was thrown into the chaos of the Second World War.
Poland was invaded by the Nazis on Friday the 1st of September 1939. A week or so before, the Nazis and the Russians had signed a non-aggression pact which more or less gave Hitler the green light to invade Poland, and also secret clauses were in place that actually gave Russia the green light to invade eastern Poland, which it did on the 17th of September 1939.
10-year-old Tadeusz was captured by the Russians and deported along with thousands of other Poles to a Russian labour camp.
Conditions, in all Russian labour camps were extremely harsh, not only for those Poles that perceived as the class enemies of Russia, but also, of course, the people that had been swept up under Stalin's purges and put into the gulags, with very poor food, long hours of hard and sometimes senseless labour as well.
Then, in 1942, Hitler invaded Russia. And Tadeusz was dragged back to Germany to work as slave labour for the Nazi war machine.
The German war economy was so dependent on foreign labour. To give you an example, in 1944 there were over 7 million foreigners working in Germany. The vast majority were slave labourers that the Nazis had taken in manhunts throughout Eastern occupied Europe.
Amazingly, Tadeusz, still only in his early teens and risking execution if he'd been caught, managed to escape from Germany. Somehow, he crossed the border to Italy and hooked up with fellow Poles. His army records showed he joined the Polish Resettlement Corps in 1946 to help with the clean-up. Tadeusz's incredible journey came to an end not long after, when he arrived in England to start a new life after the chaos of the war years.
Well, I think that the Tadeusz's story is not an untypical one for people that lived in Central Europe, and it's something that I think that we in Britain have to be very grateful that we didn't have to live through. I'm afraid it is so typical of so many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and especially younger people, who were really buffeted between the two sides of National Socialism, Nazism, and Soviet communism.
Having learned about his father's astonishing history from Hector, Roberto then set off on the final stage of his journey to Kington Camp in Herefordshire. According to the records, this was where Tadeusz had been housed along with many other Polish soldiers when they first arrived in this country. Local historian Kenneth Reeves showed him round the camp.
Yes, these are the sort of huts that your father would have been billeted in. Of course, they were originally built for the American Army as a hospital. They were designed to last for 25 years. That was in 1943. They've now been here something like 66 years. And they're rather beginning to show their age, and most of them have fallen down.
Compared to what Tadeusz would have experienced in Germany and Russia, this camp would have been like a 5-star hotel. But for Roberto, it was a very moving experience.
Una impresión triste.
It makes me feel sad, very sad, how my father could have survived before, during, and even after the war.
Y después de la guerra, ¿no?
I had no idea before all this how he could have endured such a terrible life.
Una situación semejante. El resumen es este, ¿no? El fin de...
So, this is it. The end of a story that I didn't get to hear about firsthand. But at least now I can say that I know about my father's life, and it's helped me to understand him.
Tadeusz's life, and that of millions of Europeans caught between the Nazi and communist regimes during the war, was one of unimaginable suffering and hardship. Sadly, Tadeusz never got to see his children grow up, but he did manage to leave them a legacy of £37,000, which was ultimately shared between the three of them. For Hector, it was a satisfying end to a case that could have remained unsolved if he hadn't retrieved it from that bottom drawer.
Well, I'm really pleased that the case eventually came to a successful fruition. First of all, because I could justify the amount of time I'd spent on this case. Second of all, because my hunch was right in going to Spain. More than that, really, is that I was very happy to know that some of these cases that are unsolved can still be solved and can still be cracked if you have enough determination, or at least if you have the right kind of luck, like I did.
Fraser and Fraser have been looking into the case of Douglas Greatrex, who died aged 75 in Birmingham. Douglas was the youngest of his siblings by several years and had fallen out of touch with his extended family. When he died, he owned a property, but he didn't own the leasehold, which will have affected the value of his estate.
It is a property case, but it may be a property case worth a couple of £1,000, not a couple of £100,000, which we'd hope for.
The team got off to a great start with their investigation, and it wasn't long before they'd managed to trace 16 of Douglas's heirs.
Someone's given me John L's.
I gave you John L. neighbours.
There's quite a few siblings of the deceased, and this is near kin.
For the heir hunters, if they can't find any children of the deceased, the next best result is to find near kin, meaning siblings or nieces and nephews.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Dave.
Listen, we've got it up to date with near kin on it.
Oh, right.
And we've got addresses of at least a couple of nephews in Birmingham.
OK, catch you later. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Paul's just round the corner from the first address that he's been given, so he heads straight round there. There's no one in, so he tries the neighbours.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to get hold of your neighbour, Trevor. Does he work in the day?
Yeah.
Paul calls David Pacifico in the office to give him the bad news.
It's always the way we get the early breakthroughs and get it up to date, but people are at work, aren't they? So
We've got a couple more addresses.
For Trevor's siblings.
yeah.
We've got a Roy living at
Yardley.
Right. Okie dokie, Dave.
David has finally managed to make an actual appointment with one of Douglas's heirs. His nephew, Roy Stevens, is the eldest son of Douglas's sister Doris and her husband, Sidney.
Mr Stevens. Yeah, Paul Matthews, Fraser and Fraser. We're a probate research company. We deal with the estates of people who pass away without making wills, and we trace relatives, and we think you're entitled to an estate we're dealing with. Can you spare me a few minutes? OK, that's great. Thank you very much.
Paul needs to check that Roy is actually Douglas's nephew. So he gets straight down to business.
Right, your mum, Doris, did she have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, Dougie.
Right, OK, let's...
Not him gone, is it?
Yeah.
Dougie.
It's
I had a horrible feeling with Dougie.
Yeah, he passed away. He hasn't...
Roy remembers Douglas well, so his death comes as a shock.
Go on, yeah, OK, take your time if you want. OK, so Dougie, yeah. What do you know about Dougie?
We actually seen a lot of Dougie up until Mum went, and then all of a sudden we sort of... Well, I sort of been what then?
Just disappeared. How long ago was that? Many years?
Oh, a long time ago now, yeah. I guess that at the end of the day, if Dougie saved a few bob, fair play to him, because we had been out.
He's obviously saved it for you. So wait, if you get a few bob, what are you going to do with this anyway?
I don't know. Have a drink.
Have a drink. OK, that's nice. OK, all right, thanks for your time. I'll speak to you later on. OK, cheers. Bye-bye.
By the end of their meeting, Roy is happy for Fraser's to assist him in his claim, and Paul's delighted to have signed up his first heir. But just then, something rather extraordinary happens. Back in the office, Neil has just made a connection that takes everyone by surprise.
What we've just found